for being here.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for zooming in this evening to tonight's talk with the East Hampton Library. Tonight we have Evan Weiner, who will be speaking about 1914, a pivotal year in U.S. history. And Evan has done a number of talks through the East Hampton Library that are all wonderful and well researched, and we're glad to have him back. And I just want to let everybody know, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. And toward the end of the talk, we'll have a little Q&A period. So without further ado, I'll turn over today's talk to Evan Weiner.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you from the United States and from Portugal for tuning in tonight. My background's radio and TV, and back in the day in 1978, I got onto big time radio in New York, WNEW, by an interview I accidentally did with John Lindsay, the former mayor of New York City, who told me he was running for Senate in 1980, and that's how I got on at the age of 21 on WNEW radio, 50,000 watts, when every radio station seemed to have news back in the day. I also interviewed Ronald Reagan in 1980 and Ted Kennedy in 1980 and Jack Kemp in 1979, who was running for president. And my first two real professional interviews were Ralph Nader and Julian Bond. So, yeah, it's just part of my life, history. And I was looking at 1914. And I do a talk on the lunar landing, and in 1914, Robert Goddard had it all figured out, how to get to the moon. He got 2 patents 110 years ago. All he needed was basically the material. And I started thinking about that. What else went on in 1914? Well, Franz Ferdinand, who was the Archduke of the Austria-Hungary Empire, was shot and killed on June 28th, and that would kick off, not quite, but it pretty much, that killing would lead to World War I. United States, President Wilson asks Congress for power to invade Mexico. American women want to vote, and this is the 1913 map. And those states who allowed women to vote: Wyoming 1869, Colorado 1895, Idaho 1896, Utah 1896, State of Washington 1910, California, here I come, 1911, Arizona, the new state that came in 1912, Kansas 1912, Oregon 1912, Illinois 1913, and on election day, Montana and Nevada. But if you notice, the big states at that time, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Ohio, did not allow women to vote. And women also can't compete in all Olympic events. That decree came down, led by this guy, who is the head of the International Olympic Committee. And one thing that you notice, I've been around the Olympic Committee for more than 40 years. A lot of people who are barons and sir, and lords, Lord Killian, who replaced Avery Brundage. This one is Baron Pierre de Coubertin, and the French didn't know what to do with him in the lead up to this year's opening ceremony. Good guy or bad guy? Yeah, he's a good guy. He brought the Olympics back in 1896. Bad guy, let's throw all the women out of the Olympics because women are aesthetically unsuitable for the Olympics. Panama Canal opened. I've been on a number of cruise ships talking, and to be honest with you, you've seen it open once, you've seen it open a million times. The more interesting locks for me were in Amsterdam, and also actually going up and down the Great Lakes lock system. More interesting to me anyway than the Panama Canal. You could work for $5 a day. My friend Don Cundy there. This is the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, right outside of Detroit. And they have a car that they have disassembled, but the assembly line is in place by now, and Ford's looking for workers, so $5 a day. And one of your favorite things to do every year, in fact, that reminds me, I have to do my estimated taxes. for September. Income tax. You have to start paying income tax in 1914, and Americans voted for income tax. Babe Ruth signs a baseball contract, and that is a very, very rare baseball card. It's in the Babe Ruth Museum in Baltimore, and only a handful of those cards were made, and that was Babe Ruth with the Baltimore team, the Orioles of the International League, Minor League Baseball. And Charlie Chaplin hits the silver screen, and Charlie Chaplin came over to America with a guy named Stan Jefferson. You probably know better as Stan Laurel, as part of a vaudeville team in 1912. And flying. Flying is taking off in 1914. That's a museum outside of Dulles Airport. It's part of the Smithsonian in Dulles, Virginia. But let's get back to Archduke Ferdinand. And mamas, don't let your children grow up to be archdukes, at least this family, because two of them were killed, Archduke Maximilian and also Archduke Ferdinand. The assassination that led to the Great War. He's 50 years old. His name is Franz Ferdinand, and he was the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He and his wife were assassinated by a gunman during a drive through Sarajevo, June 28, 1914. Now, Franz ignored warnings that Serbian terrorists and the group Black Hand, still upset from the Austrian annexation of the area, was plotting to assassinate him during his state visit to Sarajevo. June 28th, the day of his tour, was also Serbia's National Day. And like a good nagging wife, Sophie said, you know what, Sarajevo might be better to go. I hear they're thinking of putting the Olympics there, so maybe Sarajevo is better to go in the winter instead of the middle of summer. And friend, nobody's going to touch me. I'm popular. Nobody's going to harm me. Let's go. And they went. The assassination was traced to a Serbian extremist group that wanted to increase Serbian power in the Baltics by breaking up the Austro-Hungarian Empire. World War I was also known as the Great War, and that starts on July 28th. So we are almost 110 years to the day, the anniversary of the Great War. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Austria's chosen war, the assassination that led to the Great War. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I had begun. The Austro-Hungarian Empire attacked Serbia in response. Germany supported Austria-Hungary, while Russia sided with its traditional ally, Serbia, and that left Queen Victoria's family in a dither because, you got the Tsar, you got the Kaiser, you got the King of England, Kaiser in Germany, and the Tsar, and Willie liked all of them. That was Wilhelm, but matters of affairs had to come before matters of affair rather than family. So how did Europe come to this point? Was it inevitable? Probably was. The major powers in Europe had been preparing for war for years. The situation was so tense before the war that many experts called Europe a powder keg waiting to explode. You had the Balkan Wars, you had two Balkan Wars in 1912 and 1913. And there were other factors in the buildup to war. Arms races to build bigger and more powerful armies and navies. Growing disputes over trade and land, dissatisfaction with the balance of power in Europe, resentment from the legacy of past grievances, and all kinds of treaties and understandings that were signed. Germany declares war. All Europe is up in arms. I like this. This is the Evening World. And you got, Italy breaks the Triple Alliance. Germany declares war. All Europe is in arms. And right in the middle of the page, the baseball results. Right in the middle of the page. Alliances and treaties divided Europe. Complicated military alliances and treaties between the European powers divided much of Europe. Let's see, James Clear has something he wants to say. We could stop here for a second, and I don't see, I don't know what he has to say. It's not up there. So Anyway, oh, he wants to come in. Okay. And the consequence of these alliances and treaties meant if one country or power bloc went to war, the others would more than likely go as well. Central powers made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, which is today Turkey. The Triple Alliance, or the Triple Allies, made up of France, Russia, and Great Britain. Other alliances existed: Britain and France and Belgium, Japan and Britain, Russia and Serbia. Over time, countries throughout Europe made mutual defense agreements that would pull them into the battle. These treaties meant that if one country was attacked, allied countries were bound to defend them, and those allied countries included Canada, Australia, New Zealand. The United States wasn't bound by any of these treaties, at least not yet. As the world entered the 20th century, an arms race had begun. By 1914, Germany had the greatest increase in military buildup. Great Britain and Germany both greatly increased their navies in this time period. In Germany and Russia, particularly, the military establishment began to have a greater influence on public policy. This increase in militarism helped push the countries involved into the war. So, how did Europe get to this point? Much of the origin of the war was based on the desire of the Slavic peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina to no longer be part of Austria-Hungary. They wanted to be part of Serbia. Nationalism led directly to the war. Countries tried to prove their dominance and power. Well, here is a painting of the assassination. And if you were writing a Hollywood script about the assassination of Ferdinand, it would be rather interesting, and nobody probably would have believed it. But this is what happened. The immediate cause of the assassination was World War I and Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke. The Archduke was heir to the throne of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. His killers were a motley band of amorous students. They were Serbian nationalists, maybe Yugoslavian nationalists, and they wanted to turn Austrian-controlled Bosnia into part of the new Slav state. The guns and the bombs that they used to kill the Archduke were supplied by the Colonel Dragutin Dmitrijevic, also known as Colonel Apis, head of the Serbian military intelligence. Well, there were a couple assassination attempts that day, a couple of them. Franz Ferdinand survived an earlier assassination attempt around 10:15 a.m. when a Bosnian Serb by the name of Nedeljko Kabrinovic hurled a bomb at the Imperial motorcade as it was headed to a reception at the Sarajevo City Hall. Now he wasn't supposed to be the guy. There were supposed to be two other guys who were supposed to do this before him. He chickened out. The bomb bounced off the folded roof of Ferdinand's convertible and exploded under a car following him in his motorcade. That bomb injured several members of the Imperial entourage, those men taken to the hospital. Wasn't much security there. Wasn't much security at all. In fact, very few. Well, there's the assassination car, and he goes to City Hall. The people in charge of the Archduke's visit decided that it was a good idea to publish the motorcade route in advance. Yeah, tell them where they're coming. And nobody learned a lesson from that, because in Dallas, in November of 1963, around November 20th, Kennedy's motorcade and where it was going through Dallas was published in the newspaper. That was November 20th. And you know what happened there. There was very little security around the Archduke. Bunting, flags, and brightly colored carpets hung out the windows, and 7 would-be assassins knew exactly where to stand. There were 7 of them among the parade route carrying bombs and guns, but most chickened out. Kabrinovic was the one exception. He threw a bomb, but he missed. He wounded an official in the motorcade behind the Archduke, and the Archduke is fuming by the time he gets to City Hall. And there is Kabrinovic. He threw the bomb. When things go bad, they really go bad. So he throws the bomb, and he swallows some poison, and he's going to jump into the river below. But there were some problems with this. See, it was old cyanide, and it was very hot, so there was no river. The river was about 6 inches deep, 15 feet below the level of the road. He sprained his ankles jumping, unable to move. Like I said, when things go wrong, the cyanide poison didn't work. It was old, just made them vomit. That's about it. Meanwhile, at City Hall, the Archduke is absolutely fuming. He arrives there where the mayor of Sarajevo delivered some totally inappropriate remarks that were written before the assassination attempt. And the Archduke says, "What kind of welcome is this? I'm being met by bombs." Then he wiped the blood off of his prepared speech and addressed the crowd. Afterward, the Archduke went back in his motorcade with his wife Sophie and decided to go to the hospital. There's a problem here. Nobody told the driver of the plan. It'd be nice if they would have told the driver, because he's got to take him to the hospital and he's got to drive around. And well, we're going to go down the main street right back to the hospital. And there is the assassin, Gavrilo Princip. Plans had gone awry. Any chance of assassinating the Archduke is apparently gone, and Princip heads to the Moritz Schiller delicatessen. I guess he wanted some deli on Franz Joseph Street. It's one of Sarajevo's smartest shopping destinations, just a few yards away from the bustling thorough road known as Pel Quay. But fate steps in. Now, whether he was eating a sandwich or not, that's debatable, but he was in the area. Ferdinand's decision to visit them, the injured at the hospital, would take him directly past the spot where a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist, Princip, was eating lunch, or maybe just standing around. We don't know. It has never been established. The Archduke's chauffeur, his name was Leopold Lokak, was a stranger to Sarajevo. He gets lost. He swings off of Pel Quay into the crowded Franz Joseph Street, then drifts to a stop right in front of Moritz Schiller's restaurant. Supposedly, Princip buys a sandwich and starts eating, then looks up and, my God, there he is. I have my chance now. His target, the Archduke, sitting idle in his car just a few feet away. Now, he might have dropped the sandwich, might have not dropped the sandwich, might have not had a sandwich, but takes full advantage of the opportunity. The sandwich part might have been made up. But Princip was in front of the deli and changed the course of the world by firing 2 shots. X marks the spot. And down at the bottom of that picture, that is where the Archduke's car was, and there is Moritz's deli, and the rest is history. The Archduke slumped back, mortally wounded. Inside Schiller's deli, the most important sandwich in the history of the world, maybe, lies half-eaten on the table. The driver of the couple's car then sped off for medical help. Sophie died en route. Franz is saying, "You can't die. Think of the kids. Think of the kids." And Ferdinand died shortly thereafter. Princip tried to shoot himself. Boy, when things go bad. But he was apprehended by bystanders. Now, there's a little byplay here. The Archduke's family never liked Sophie. She didn't think that he was good enough for, or she was good enough for Franz Ferdinand. And you'll see a picture in a minute showing that. Right place, right time? It seems that way. 25 men were arrested and charged, while the investigation revealed that 6 assassins had been plotting to kill the Archduke that day. And there is Princip being arrested. He's right there on the right side. And he's dressed up in a 3-piece suit. Look at that. He came for business. He was arrested, faced trial. The proceedings began on October 12th in Sarajevo. Princip and his co-conspirators charged with treason and murder. Despite the gravity of the charges, Princip remained defiant throughout the trial. He openly admitted to his role in the assassination, expressed no remorse for his actions, stating his intentions were, or it was, to free the people from Austrian-Hungarian rule. He meant business, the Black Hand. Look at that logo. Skull and crossbones. It's the kind of thing that you find on the iodine bottle. It was a secret society called Union or Death, founded in Belgrade as an outgrowth of an older Serbian nationalist group. The Black Hand took over the older group's work of anti-Austrian propaganda within Serbia, which included sabotage, espionage, political murders abroad, especially in the provinces of Austria-Hungary that wished to annex. The group included many radicals, government officials, professionals, and army officers. When it was learned that the heir apparent to the Austrian throne, Franz Ferdinand, who, by the way, was a big game hunter and killed 50,000 animals in his life, an estimated 50,000 animals, was scheduled to visit Sarajevo in June, the Black Hand decided to assassinate him because of his perceived threat to Serbian independence. 3 young Bosnians were recruited, trained, and equipped, and that included Princip. Now, you can't really make this out all that well in this picture, but Sophie, the family didn't like her. She was not up to snuff. And in this picture is the final insult. They're lying in rest, and she's 20 inches below him, just to show her level in society, in the pecking order of society. He's raised 20 inches above his wife. The political objective of the assassination: free Bosnia and Herzegovina of Austrian-Hungarian rule and establish a common South Slave or Yugoslav state. Anti-Serb protests and riots followed throughout Austria-Hungary in the wake of the assassination, and that kicks off the July crisis, which led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia and the start of World War I on July 28th. The July crisis, and that is the Kaiser and his generals, and they're trying to figure out what to do in all these alliances. And not only all these alliances, but there are the cousins. Willie loved Nikki, or did he? And Willie loved George V, or did he? And these are all Queen Victoria's grandkids, and they're about ready to go to war. Following the murder, Austria-Hungary sought to inflict a military blow on Serbia to demonstrate its own strength and to dampen Serbian support for Yugoslavian nationalism, viewing it as a threat to the unity of its multinational empire. But Vienna was wary of the reaction of Russia, major supporter of Serbia, and they wanted a guarantee from the ally, Germany, that Berlin would support Austria in any conflict, even though Willie and Nikki are, close cousins, and also George V. Germany guaranteed its support through what came to be known as the blank check, but urged Austria-Hungary, do it quickly, localize the war, don't get Russia involved, just get in and out of there, and that's all we ask. The Austrian government on July 23rd sent Serbia an ultimatum to be answered within 48 hours. The ultimatum may have been designed to be unacceptable. It required that publications hostile to Austria, a newspaper, even if it's a weekly newspaper, be suppressed. Anti-Austrian patriotic organizations dissolved. Teachings that smacked of propaganda be barred from the schools. Officials known for conducting anti-Austrian campaigns be dismissed. Serbian officials believed to be involved in the assassination plot to be arrested. Oh yeah, and give us a formal apology. They'll take care of everything. You just apologize. Well, Austria has chosen war. That's the Washington Times, which is a different Washington Times than exists today. The one that exists today was founded by Reverend Moon. This one was a totally different one back in 1914. Some of the demands that Serbs might have accepted, but 2 others they couldn't. Austrian officials worked with Serbians in the investigating the plot, and that judicial action be taken against any found guilty by this joint investigation. While accepting most points, the Serbian reply was evasive on the most important ones, and besides, Serbia had begun mobilization before delivering the answer. Serbia apparently hoped the strategy would allow time for further negotiations, but the Austrian minister immediately left Belgrade, and Austria began to call up its troops, and to war. Austria's gone to war July 28th. Does Willie love Nikki, or does he love George? There's Willie on the right, Nikki on the left. Well, do the families love one another? Is this part of the problem? Germany supported Austria in the decision, but the German diplomats still put pressure on the Vienna government to act against Serbia while trying to find out whether George V in Britain would remain neutral in the general war. The British monarch, George V, was the first cousin of Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm, both of them being grandchildren of Queen Victoria. War to come, the Germans wished to place the guilt on the Russians, so maybe Willie didn't love Nicky as much as he claimed in letters to each other. Remember when we were in summer camp? Russia set in motion the full mobilization of its armies. Germany's Kaiser Wilhelm, on July 29th, told his cousin, the Russian Tsar Nicholas II, in a personal telegram about Germany's attempts to get the Austrians to compromise. Telegram caused full Russian mobilization to be modified into partial mobilization against Austria and caused the Austro-Russian talks to be resumed on July 30th. If German Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg could make it appear that a full-scale war was the fault of the Russians, he still had some hope that King George V would turn the other way. Germany declares war. All Europe is up in arms. Again, right in the middle of that, the baseball scores. Got to take care of the bettors. Lots of betting on baseball in those days. But anyway, Italy breaks the Triple Alliance, and France calls out her army war. Mobilization was not easy in Russia. That's a big, big country, poor communications. The Russian military feared their enemies would get a lead on them, so the Russian government decided to renew general mobilization. Germany at once insisted that all Russian mobilizations cease when it occurred, and when it occurred, ordered its own at 4 o'clock on August the 1st. Willie and Nicky were at odds, and Willie's Germany declared war on Nicky's Russia 3 hours later. Cousins didn't love one another. Does Willie love Nicky or George? George V's on the right. France, meanwhile, had determined to stand by its Russian ally and mobilized at 3:55 in the afternoon, August 1st. Having failed to get Britain to guarantee French neutrality and apparently convinced that France would come to the Russian support, Germany invaded Luxembourg on August 2nd and demanded from Belgium permission to cross its territory in exchange for Belgian neutrality. And that is Bruges in Belgium. And that's Belgium would become the centerpiece of the war. Belgium refused. August 3rd, Belgium declared war on France. Then Germany invaded Belgium to seize the ports on the English Channel and bear down on Paris. Great Britain declares war on Germany. You got the war up top and hats on the bottom there. Buy hats. Britain had been wavering, although a cooperation pact with France did not legally bind the two nations together. It had led to close coordination of defense plans by the French military and the British military and naval staffs. What made entry certain was Germany's violation of the neutrality of Belgium. On August 4th, George V no longer liked Cousin Willie. Britain went to war against Germany. And America's waiting. It's Woodrow Wilson. And they're waiting. And they're waiting to see how things pan out. After all, business is business. And they had business that they're doing with both sides in the war. At the outbreak of the fighting, the United States, with its neighbor to the north, Canada, which kind of was and wasn't a country, but part of the Commonwealth involved in the war, the United States remained on the sidelines of World War II, adopting the policy of neutrality favored by President Woodrow Wilson, while continuing to engage in commerce and shipping with European countries on both sides of the conflict. On August 4th, Wilson declared that the United States would remain impartial in thought as well as in action. Now, that is, again, that's Bruges, and that's now kind of a museum piece. It was a submarine that was used during World War I. The first European clash since 1815's Battle of Waterloo. The Battle of Mons takes place in Mons, Belgium, with a British expeditionary force that numbers about 75,000 fighting, an estimated 150,000 Germans in an attempt to hold the Mons-Conde Canal. In the final of 4 battles of the frontier held in the first weeks of World War II, the British forces are overpowered, forced to retreat, handing the Germans a strategic victory. Some 1,600 British and 5,000 Germans casualties were reported. Well, the trial is taking place. Kabrinovic and Princip are on trial. And they were found guilty of high treason by a Sarajevo court, October 25th. Kabrinovic would die on January 23rd, 1916, is one of 8 of the 13 men incarcerated who died while serving their sentence due to inhumane conditions of their imprisonment. Princip said, I kind of changed his tune a little bit, I only wanted to kill the Archduke, or part of his cadre. They didn't know how old he was, because he was 2 weeks short of his 20th birthday on the birth certificate, but he might have been a little older, and that spared his life. He was too young to be executed under Austro-Hungarian law. The death sentence could only be given to criminals aged 20 or more. He really didn't know when his birthday was, and the records couldn't figure out when his birthday was. Instead, he was jailed, sentenced to 20 years in solitary confinement with the condition that 1 day a month he was to receive no food. Now, you're at war. You're at war here. And all of a sudden, it's Christmas time. And because it's Christmas time, we don't need to fight. Hey, Hans, how you doing? Good, Tommy, how are you? Hey, want to play a little football? Yeah, sure, let's play a little football. The Christmas truce. It was a series of widespread unofficial ceasefires along the Western Front. Roughly 100,000 British and German troops were involved in the informal cessation of hostilities along the Western Front. The Germans placed candles on their trenches and on Christmas trees. Then they continued the celebration by singing Christmas carols. Sounds like a Mel Brooks movie, doesn't it? The British responded, hey, if they're going to sing those songs, we're going to sing our own songs. And they did, and they're singing at each other. The two sides continued shouting Christmas greetings to each other. Hey, Kaiser, Kaiser's okay. So is George V. Yeah, thumbs up. Soon afterwards, there were excursions across no man's land, and they decided to exchange gifts, food, tobacco, alcohol, and souvenirs such as buttons and hats. Hey, that helmet looks good. Can you give me that helmet with the point on it? Sure. I'll give you my hat. They exchanged souvenirs, and they played football or soccer. And there's the game. Legend has it an organized football match took place between British and German soldiers on Christmas Day 2014. Here's the quote. Suddenly a Tommy came with a football, kicking already and making fun, and then began a football match, wrote Lieutenant Johannes Niemann of the 133rd Saxon Infantry Regiment. We marked the goals with our caps. Teams were quickly established for the match on frozen mud. And the Fritzies, the Fritzies, beat the Tommies 3-2. Some cases, a truce was said to have lasted until the new year, but in most cases, little pockets of peace on the Western Front had vanished within a day or two, and it was back to fighting. Hey, give me back that helmet. I need that helmet. Here's your hat. Well, that didn't happen. Meanwhile, there is a war in the United States, and well, actually, it was in Mexico. Mexico against the United States, the occupation of Veracruz. Now, the United States and Mexico have never had a really good friendly relationship ever since the Mexican War of 1846, when the Americans ended up with roughly 55% of Mexico. And then they took the Gadsden Purchase, gave them more land down in New Mexico and Arizona. And the Mexicans have always been smarting over this. On April 9th, Mexican officials arrested 9 U.S. sailors who had strayed into restricted space in the small oil town of Tampico, who set off a diplomatic crisis between Mexico and the United States that became known as the Tampico Affair. Seemed minor, after all, it's only 9 guys. I don't know if they were drunk or not. I don't know what they were doing. It's only 9 guys. Mexican authorities initially apologized, This sounds like it's right out of Duck Soup with Groucho Marx and the word. That's it, Upstart. And Fredonia going to war with Sylvania in Duck Soup. Anyway, the Mexicans refused to salute the American flag on their own territory. And that was get the apology and salute the flag. Those were the conditions demanded by the local United States Naval Commander, the Rear Admiral Henry T. Mayo. On April 15th, the Mexican president, Victoriano Huerta, made a surprising concession. He agreed to fire the 21-gun salute on the condition that the Americans fire a simultaneous salute. Not Woodrow Wilson. Nope, 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 nope. And he gives Huerta an ultimatum. You fire that salute by 6 o'clock on April 19th, or else. What's the or else? And there is Woodrow Wilson. The or else? Occupation of Veracruz. Wilson's pretext for this operation was the imminent arrival of an armed shipment in the port for use by the Mexican president Huerta, generally considered an enemy of the United States. The occupation of Veracruz began on April 21st. The arms were shipped to another port a short time later, and they came from Germany. Wilson also chose to escalate the crisis by ordering preparation for the military occupation of the Mexican port of Veracruz. He even preempted Congress by ordering operations to begin before permission arrived from Capitol Hill. And there's the occupation. On the morning, April 21st, warships of the United States Atlantic Fleet under the command of Rear Admiral Frank Friday Fletcher began preparations for the seizure of the Veracruz waterfront. Fletcher's orders were to seize Custom House. Do not permit war supplies to be delivered to the Huerta government or any other party. At 11:12 a.m., now this is even great, even better. The American Council, the guy's name was William Canada. The United States is fighting Mexico, and a guy by the name of Canada is heavily involved. Anyway, the council, William Canada, watched from the roof of the American consulate as the first boatload of Marines left the auxiliary vessel, USS Prairie. Whaleboats carrying 502 Marines from the 2nd Advanced Base Regiment, 285 Navy sailors from the battleship USS Florida, and a provisional battalion composed of the Marine detachments from Florida and her sister ship, the USS Utah, also began landing operations. And there was an occupation, and it wasn't overnight. On the night of April 21st, Fletcher decided he had no choice but to expand the initial operation to include the entire city of Veracruz, not just the waterfront. At 8 a.m. the next day, he gave orders to take control of the entire city. At 8:35, Captain C.T. Vogelsang's San Francisco entered the harbor next to the Prairie and offloaded a landing party. At 3 a.m., Commander William A. Moffett, Chester's, the ship is called the Chester, offloaded 2 companies of Marines and a company of seamen. These were followed by men from the Minnesota and Hancock of Admiral Charles J. Badger's Atlantic Fleet, bringing the total men ashore to more than 3,000. And that is what the occupation of Veracruz looked like. This attack was initially repulsed. Soon, the attack was renewed with artillery support from 3 warships in the harbor, the Prairie, the San Francisco, and Chester, and pounded the academy. This is the academy where the Mexican soldiers were staying, with their long guns for a few minutes, silencing all resistance. At 7:45 of the morning of April 22nd, the advance began. A regiment led by Navy Captain E.A. Anderson advanced on the Naval Academy in the parade ground formation, making his men easy targets for the partisans barricaded inside, but there was nobody inside. They all left. The building was vacant. They're gone. And more occupation of Veracruz. On April 26, Fletcher declared martial law and started turning the occupation over to the American Army under the command of General Frederick Funston. 19 American sailors and Marines were killed. As an immediate reaction to the military invasion of Veracruz, several anti-US riots broke out in Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Uruguay. US citizens were expelled from the Mexican territory, and some had to be accommodated to refugee camps in New Orleans, Texas City, and San Diego. Well, there's a new guy who's coming in, Venustiano Carranza, and the Constitutionalists on July 15th. This is still part of the Mexican Civil War. Defeated the forces of Herrera, and Herrera resigned for office, and Carranza, the leader of the Constitutionalist faction, became the provisional leader of Mexico. With Herrera gone, the United States no longer had a reason to hold Veracruz. Wilson tried to secure guarantees that the new government would not punish Mexicans who worked with the U.S. military government, nor levy import duties on merchants who already paid the U.S. military government. In his negotiations with the United States, Carranza proves to be similar to his predecessor. United States. We don't need no stinking United States making decisions for us here in Mexico. Parting is such sweet sorrow. There go the Americans. Carranza did not agree to Wilson's conditions until threats to his provisional presidency from rival constitutional factions made him desperate to flee to Mexico City and take refuge in Veracruz. On the morning of November 23rd, the 7,000 American servicemen in Veracruz marched through the streets to the music of a military band. I'm sure they played Sousa. He's only 10 years removed at that time. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, local time, all the Americans are gone. They're on their ships, and they're seeing Veracruz from the poop deck. Goodbye, farewell, so long. After the Americans left, Mexico refused to participate with the United States in its military excursion in Europe and guaranteed German companies they could keep operations open, especially in Mexico City, as the Great War continued. That is Alice Paul, and she has a museum somewhere in New Jersey. She was the leader of the women's suffragette movement in 1914. Alice Paul realized that being polite and asking sweetly for the right to vote was not getting women anywhere, and that radical tactics were necessary. For a woman, that might mean standing on the street corner. Reminds me of the Frank Lesser song, standing on the corner watching all the girls go by. Well, these girls didn't want guys to watch them at that time. They had other ideas. For a woman, that meant standing on the street corner, holding a sign, or speaking out from a stage. Those were considered radical acts. Paul was arrested 7 times and imprisoned 3 times in England in 1908 and 1909 after moving to England and getting involved in the English women's suffragette movement. She learned that hunger strikes were an effective way to get attention and bring sympathy to the cause. She returned to the United States in 1910 and turned her attention to the American suffragette movement or suffrage movement after the deaths of Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1902, Susan B. Anthony in 1906. The suffrage movement was languishing, lacking focus under conservative suffrage organizations that concentrated only on achieving state suffrage. Paul believed that the movement needed to focus on the passage of federal suffrage and an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. You're arrested. Yeah, some of those women were arrested, like my wife there. She was arrested. You're arrested. Why? You're protesting. You want the right to vote. Shut your mouth, get back into the kitchen, rattle those pots and pans. Don't even think about voting. 1911, Alice Paul led Philadelphia's first street corner campaign for the right to vote. Night after night for 2 months, speaking from a horse-drawn cart, Paul and other suffragists made their case to the crowds that sometimes numbered in the hundreds. At her side, Lucy Burns. She was from Brooklyn. She met Alice Paul in a London police station. She too was protesting. And there was Lucy Burns. Paul and Burns offered to take over the National Women's Suffrage Association's Congressional Committee in Washington, D.C., which was tasked with promoting a constitutional amendment. She topped her action with a plan for a parade in 1913 a spectacle of a sort never seen in Washington, and this is what it was. Official program, Women's Suffrage Procession, Washington, D.C., March 3rd, 1913. And that's the day before Woodrow Wilson is inaugurated, a procession of some 8,000, mostly female marchers, wearing white or clad in colorful caps and capes, interspersed with mounted brigades in decorated floats unspooled on Pennsylvania Avenue. The first float proclaimed, "We demand an amendment to the Constitution of the United States enfranchising the women of the country." And demand was a dirty word. It's one of those 7 words that George Carlin, well, I guess it wasn't, it would have been the 8th word. Remember George Carlin and the 7 words you couldn't say on radio and TV, the 7 dirty words? Add demand to that. It's an incendiary word. Something nice women didn't do. And there were a lot of women who were no longer nice. Like, take the song, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." It's Katie Casey who screams to her boyfriend, "Take me out to the ball game." That song was based on a woman by the name of Trixie Forganza, who was Jack Norwood's girlfriend back in 1906, who was demanding the right to vote. And then you got William Howard Taft. He goes out to a baseball game, April 14th, 1910, because he's upset. He's dealing with women at their convention in Washington, basically saying, "Mr. Taft, give us the right to vote." And they're booing him and they're hissing him. He goes out to a baseball game and throws out the first pitch, starts a tradition. These women were putting an unsympathetic Wilson on notice. They expected action. No sooner was Paul's parade underway when thousands of onlookers spilled into its path, blocking its progress. Men spit at the marchers. They threw lighted cigarettes, hurled insults. Where are the police? No, they're not involved. They're just watching. They're not involved. Law enforcement officials just standing by idly, not involved. To the surprise of many, Paul was pleased by this chaos. The parade made news coast to coast. There would be a parade on May 9th. On March 19th, the Senate, that would be in Washington, the Senate had voted against a proposed constitutional amendment calling for the states to decide if women should vote nationally. The measure fell short of the required 2/3 vote of the Senate needed to pass the proposal to the states. The only other time this happened was in 1868, when Andrew Johnson was president, when the suffrage amendment was first brought before Congress. This is a New York City protest. This is Fifth Avenue, and it kind of looks like Fifth Avenue in a way, doesn't it? Lower Manhattan. Activists leave Washington, D.C. to campaign against Democratic congressional candidates in states where women were already enfranchised. The reason why against the Democrats, because the Democrats of those days believed in what the Republicans of today believed in, and they want to get rid of those Democrats. On October 23rd, an estimated 25,000 supporters in a women's suffrage march on New York's Fifth Avenue, led by the Dr. Anna Shore and Carrie Chapman Catt, the founder of the League of Women Voters. So they're marching in October. Montana and Nevada say yes. They say yes. And considering that it was only men who could vote in 1914, it's probably an upset in a way. Women's suffrage, vote yes or vote no. By the time World War I started, 1914, women in 8 states, all west of the Mississippi except Illinois, had won the right to vote. First state to grant women the right to vote had been Wyoming, 1869. Utah, 1870. Colorado, 1893. Idaho, 1896. Washington, the state, 1910. California, here I come, 1911. Oregon and the new state of Arizona in 1912. On November 3rd, 1914, men said yes to giving women the right to vote in referendums in Montana and Nevada. Vote Tuesday for a senator. Couldn't vote for a senator prior to 1914. It would be a constitutional amendment that changed it. What happened before state legislators voted for a senator. Passed by Congress May 13, 1912, ratified April 8, 1913, the 17th Amendment modified Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution by allowing voters to cast direct votes for U.S. senators. Prior to the passage, senators were chosen by state legislatures. November 3rd was the first time that all American men and a handful of women could vote for a United States senator. 32 seats, or 1/3 of the Senate, was up for grabs. Well, the French didn't know what to do with Baron Pierre de Coubertin, the guy who reignited the modern Olympics back in 1896 in Athens, Greece. He was an aristocrat, and he said the games, 1914, this is 18 years after they returned, the games were created for the solemn and periodic exaltation of male athleticism, with female applause as an award or reward. That women shouldn't compete in the games was self-explanatory, said Coubertin, as no women participated in the ancient games. There obviously was to be no place for them in the modern ones. Except he was wrong. There were women who competed in women's ancient games. It is indecent that spectators should be exposed to the risk of seeing the body of a woman smashed before their eyes. Besides, no matter how tough the sportswoman may be, her organism, said that right, is not cut out to sustain certain shocks. Her nerves rule her muscles. Nature wanted it that way. I guess Pierre, besides being a baron, knew all about the human anatomy. He made a great doctor, wouldn't he? So France didn't know what to do with him on the lead up to today's opening ceremonies. Is he a good guy, or is he a heel, or a male chauvinist pig? More like a male chauvinist pig. That was the 19 Paris Olympics. A bunch of women golfers dressed from head to toe because he didn't want any men to get excited by women, and if they dressed from head to toe, they weren't going to get excited. The Olympic Games, which were revived in 1894 by de Coubertin as a celebration of virility, were reserved for male athletes, the first one being in 1896. Women were admitted in 1900 as participants in sports that were considered compatible with their femininity and fragility, but excluded from the showpiece events of track and field. Myron Cohn, the old comedian, if you would have asked him or said this, you know, women outlive men. Why? Because the men want it that way. 1900 Paris Games included 22 women. That was an Olympic tennis pro in 1900. From head to neck, rather from toe to neck with a hat on, long sleeves. Don't want to get any men excited. No siree. The IOC president, de Coubertin, tried to marginalize women's sports after the 1912 Stockholm Games. He and many of his IOC colleagues believed an Olympiad with females would be impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and improper. It would be the most unaesthetic sight human eyes could contemplate. Now, here in the United States, and I know this for a fact because I had to go out and speak to Mary Lou Retton in 1984 and others, and CBS broke into its radio news coverage in 1994 after Tanya Harding clubbed, or Jeff Gahuli clubbed Nancy Kerrigan prior to the figure skating event in Norway. Figure skating in the Winter Games and in the United States, and women's gymnastics are the centerpiece of NBC's coverage. They get the most viewers, although in China it's ping pong. And when in 2028, when cricket comes into the LA Olympics, which may be played on Long Island, it's another story for another day, how it's going to be an LA Olympics, but New York is going to host the cricket matches, although Tahiti is hosting some of the swimming or yachting events for Paris. But anyway, getting back to it, the figure skating is in the United States number one, ping pong in China, and in 2028 in LA. Back in India and Pakistan, they're going to get 600 million people to watch the cricket match between India and Pakistan. 1914 IOC General Session made it clear no women to participate in track and field, but as for before, allowed to participate in fencing and swimming. The Panama Canal opens, and this is just stealing land, and that is Colón do yourself a favor, don't walk in Cologne. I did. I had two cops telling me and my wife, get out of here, get out of here, get back to the port. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous. Had cops with sirens going after me. August 15th, the Panama Canal was open to traffic. The rush of settlers to California and Oregon in the mid-19th century, the gold rush, was the initial impetus of the U.S. desire to build an artificial waterway across Central America. In 1855, the United States completed a railroad across the Isthmus of Panama, then part of Colombia, promoting various parties to propose canal building plans. Ultimately, Colombia awarded the rights to build the canal to Ferdinand de Lesseps, the French entrepreneur, who completed the Suez Canal in 1869. Construction on the sea-level canal began in 1881, but inadequate planning, disease, yellow fever, among the workers and financial problems drove Lesseps' company into bankruptcy. 3 years later, Philippe Jean Benoit Valrelia, a former chief engineer of the canal, works in a French citizen, acquired the assets of the defunct French company. Seen it once, you've seen it all. That's from one of the decks of a celebrity ship, and that's what it looks like if you haven't been there. By the turn of the century, sole possession of the Isthmian Canal became imperative to the United States, which had acquired an overseas empire at the end of the Spanish-American War, which included Guam, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and Philippines, and sought the ability to move warships and commerce quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. In 1902, the U.S. Congress authorized purchase of the French Canal Company, pending a treaty with Colombia and allocating funding for the canal's construction. Treaty was signed with Colombia in 1903, allowing the U.S. use of the territory in exchange for financial compensation. The U.S. Senate ratified the treaty, but in Colombia they said, no way, man. Absolutely no way. You're not going to impose this on us. So Teddy Roosevelt did something else. There's the Panama Canal again. In response, President Teddy Roosevelt gave tacit approval to the Panamanian independence movement, which was engineered in a large part by Philippe Jean Benoit Valrelia and his canal company. On November 3rd, 1903, a faction of Panamanians issued a Declaration of Independence from Colombia. I wonder who backed that. Maybe it was the Americans? Yeah, probably. On November 6, 1903, the United States recognized the Republic of Panama, and the treaty was signed with Panama, granting the U.S. exclusive and permanent possession of the Panama Canal Zone. The Panama Canal opens, lots of yellow fever down there. 1906, American engineers decided on the construction of a lock canal, and the next 3 years were spent developing construction facilities and eradicating tropical diseases in the area. In 1909, construction began. Construction crews literally had to move mountains in a snake-infested jungle with an average temperature of 80 degrees. That's year-round, more like 95 in the summer, and 105 inches of rain a year. An estimated 25,000 people died during 3 decades of construction from yellow fever and accidents. Between 1904 and the end of construction in 1913, 5,855 United States canal workers died. Gold rush started by Ford's $5 offer. Work for $5. $5 minimum salary for all eligible employees working 8-hour days. You get $5 a day, $153 in today's money. That was January 5th. The goal of the moving assembly line was to take what had been relatively skilled craft work and reduce it to simple rote tasks. Workers who had taken pride in their labor were quickly bored by the more mundane assembly process. Some took to lateness and absenteeism. Many simply quit, and Ford found itself with a crippling labor turnover about 370%. The assembly line depended on the steady crew of employees to staff it, and training replacements was expensive. Ford realized or reasoned that a bigger paycheck might make the factory's tedium a bit more tolerable. How many of you like paying income tax? How many of you like paying income tax? Raise your hand. Well, actually, Americans voted for income tax. They wanted it. 1909, progressives in Congress again attached a provision for an income tax to a tariff bill. Conservatives, hoping to kill the idea for good, proposed a constitutional amendment enacting such a tax. They believed that an amendment would never receive ratifications by 3/4 of the state. Guess they took polling. The polling was wrong. Much to their surprise, the amendment was ratified by one state legislature after another, and on February 25th, 1913, with the certification of Secretary of State Philander. I think they got the word from this guy's name. Was he a philanderer? I guess he was. That was his name. Philander C. Knox. The 16th Amendment took effect. Americans started paying income tax in 1914 if they paid or were paid more than $3,000, or about $94,000 today annually. And I know a lot of people who wouldn't mind taking that 94,000 and over. You pay, under that, we'll pay. But that's how it started. Federal League's opener in Baltimore in 1914. The Federal League came together in early 1913, baseball's Federal League, through the work of John T. Powers, and immediately challenged the operations of organized baseball as a minor league playing outside of the national agreement. After James A. Gilmore succeeded Powers as league president, the league declared itself, "We're the major leagues." Playing in what detractors call the Outlaw League allowed talent to avoid the restrictions of organized league's reserve clause, which forced a player to be on the team in perpetuity unless the team ridded themselves of the player. The competition of another better playing league caused players' salaries to skyrocket, demonstrating the bargaining power of potential free agents for the first time since the war between the American League and National League ended in 1903 with the signing of the National Agreement. The league had 8 teams: Baltimore, Brooklyn, Buffalo. Buffalo was a top 10 population city at that time. Chicago, as was Baltimore. Indianapolis, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. Those two were top 10 population cities. Brooklyn, Chicago, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis were competing against Major League Baseball teams. Federal League notable, Cy Falkenberg. He pitched for the Brooklyn team, the Brooklyn Federals, in 1914. The new league was initially successful, getting people to see games, but the financial strains of battling MLB teams in skyrocketing. Player salaries became a problem quickly, especially in Baltimore, but not for the Federal League Baltimore Terrapins. Baltimore's minor league team, the Baltimore Orioles, began selling off players to Major League Baseball teams in an effort to stay afloat. And these cards, Babe Ruth's card was printed in both blue and red, and that's the manager, Jack Dunn. And Ruth, those days, is known as George Ruth. In fact, Ruth's name is not even on the card. It just says Ruth, pitcher. George Herman Ruth was born on February 6, 1895, a Baltimore saloonkeeper's son. He was a problem child, and at the age of 7, his parents placed him in Baltimore St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys. He just missed Al Jolson being there. Al Jolson was in the same reformatory. The school was run by Catholic Xavier Brothers. Ruth spent almost his entire youth there. St. Mary's was the place where Ruth, with the help and encouragement of brother Matthias Boutelier, developed into a promising baseball player. And there is the babe left in the back row. On February 14th, when George Ruth was 19 years old, Jack Dunn, the manager of the Baltimore Orioles of the Minor League Baseball's International League, signed him to his first professional baseball contract. He gave him $250, which is about $8,000 today. At the time, the Baltimore Orioles team was a minor league franchise in the International League. But there was a problem. George's parents signed custody of him to St. Mary's. He was not allowed to leave the school until he's 21 years old. Jack Dunn became George Ruth's legal guardian. When George Ruth made his first appearance on the field, other players were not impressed. They started making jokes about him. And one of the players says, "Well, here's Jack's newest babe. Babe got a nickname." The other players started calling him Babe. The name stuck. And he was traded to Major League's Boston Red Sox. Pitchers, Ruth and Shore. Shore was also a really good pitcher. And Egan from Baltimore go to Boston. And that's the Boston Daily Globe, one of the few newspapers from 1914 that's still in existence. Jack Dunn's Orioles team was running away with the league's pennant but losing money at the box office. The Federal League's Terrapins franchise took fans and money away from his team to make his payroll. Dunn moved the team to Richmond, Virginia, sold George Ruth and 11 other players to Major League Baseball teams. And George Ruth has a new team, the Red Sox. On July 7th, Dunn offered to trade Ruth along with Ernie Shore and Ben Egan to Connie Mack of the Philadelphia Athletics. If that deal was made, the Philadelphia Phillies would be playing elsewhere and Philadelphia would still be an American League team. Dunn asked for $10,000, $313,000 in today's money for the trio, but Connie Mack said nope. Well, the Cincinnati Reds also passed on Ruth. They did take two players from Dunn, George Twombly and Claude Derrick. Did you ever hear of George Twombly and Claude Derrick? Neither have I. They could add Babe Ruth. 2 days later, on July 9th, Dunn sold the trio to the Boston Red Sox organization. Ruth appeared in 5 games for the Red Sox in 1914. Pitching in 4 of them, he picked up the victory in his Major League debut on July 11th. The Red Sox team had many star players, so Ruth was sent to the minor league Providence Graves of Providence, Rhode Island for the rest of the season. Behind the work of 2 pitchers, Ruth and Carl Mays would end up being a significant pitcher in the major leagues. The Grays won the International League minor league pennant. You ought to be in pictures, and there is Charlie Chaplin. On February 2nd, Charlie Chaplin's first film, Making a Living, was released. Chaplin was a stage and vaudeville performer from England who had success on the vaudeville tour of the United States in 1912. Stan Jefferson, better known as Stan Laurel, was also on that bill. A second tour of the United States began in October 1912, and during that tour, Chaplin was invited to join the New York Motion Picture Company. You ought to be in pictures, Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin's boss was a guy by the name of Max Sennett. And how many of you remember the Keystone Cops? Because that was his creation. Of the Keystone Film Company, who initially expressed concern that the 24-year-old looked too young. He was not used in the picture until late January, during which time Chaplin attempted to learn the process of filmmaking. The one-reeler, Making a Living, marked his film acting debut, released on February 2nd, and Chaplin became an international star. I don't know how many of you have gone on Route 4 from St. Petersburg to Tampa. It's a trip that should take 30 minutes. It's not, never will, unless it's 3 in the morning. It's just not happening. But you can take a plane in 1914. It was called the Airboat Line, first fast passenger and express service. First flight takes place January 1st. The world's first scheduled commercial passenger flight takes place when Anthony Habersack Janus piloted a St. Petersburg, Tampa Airboat Line Bonise Type 14 flying boat from St. Petersburg to Tampa. The tickets, $5, about $157 today. The flight took about a half hour. On a good day, it should take 28 minutes driving with no traffic over Interstate 4 from St. Petersburg to Tampa. All you have to do is find that good day. Well, what's the legacy from 1914? World War I ended on the battlefield, November 11th, 1918. Wilson and the Americans entered the war on April 6, 1917. In 1919, Wilson attempted to negotiate a peace and started an international body called the League of Nations to prevent future wars. The Americans never joined the League or signed off on 2 treaties to end the war, the 1919 Treaty of Versailles and the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne. That is Princip. He died in prison on April 28, 1918, in the new Yugoslavia. He was hailed as a national hero, a martyr who had given his life up for the cause of Slav unification. Monuments were erected in his honor, and his remains were reinterred in Sarajevo. However, he was considered a destructive force in Austria and Hungary, where he was seen as a symbol of the violent nationalism that led to the disintegration of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Mexico, that's the border, Tijuana. In 1917, Mexico declined an invitation to join Germany in the Central Powers in World War I. The United States and Mexico have a complicated relationship, and there seems to be a perpetual border crisis going back to the 1830s when Mexico wanted to put up a wall to keep the Americans out of the American territory of Texas. They wanted to put up a wall in 1830 to keep the Americans out of Mexico. Women's suffrage. Most women got the right to vote most women got the right to vote became a constitutional amendment in 1920. Not all American women got the right to vote in 1920. In 1920, Native Americans weren't allowed to be in the United States citizens, so the federal amendment did not give them the right to vote. With the passage of the Snyder Act in 1924, American native-born women, I'm just saying this, okay, I will get to that. So many interesting subjects that left me increased curiosity to know more, mainly about the great questions of Mexico, USA. Of course, here in Europe, we have the tendency to think that those issues with Mexico in revolution until 1920 led to a late entry in the war. I don't agree with that. They were just, there were too many people who did not want to go into the war in the United States. And Wilson campaigned on the slogan, "He kept you out of war," in 1916 in his presidential re-election. On the other reasons, like certain geographical distance. Thank you. And I'm glad you enjoyed it from Portugal. Thank you for that. No, Wilson campaigned, he kept us out of war. Anyway, native women gained their citizenship in 1924. As late as 1962, individual states still prevented some women from voting by the use of literacy taxes, poll taxes, and claims that residence on a reservation meant one wasn't a resident of that state. Native-born Asian Americans already had U.S. citizenship in 1920, but first-generation Asian Americans did not. Asian American immigrant women were therefore excluded from voting until the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 allowed them to gain citizenship more than 3 decades after the 19th Amendment. Oh, by the way, the poll tax, another constitutional amendment, eliminated 60 years ago. That's Alice Milliere. She protested about not being allowed to compete in the Olympics and did something about it. She put together a women's competition. The Women's Olympics is an alternative to the male-centric games. In total, 4 women's games were staged: 1922 Paris, 1926 Gothenburg, Sweden, 1930 Prague, 1934 London, and the athletes came from North America, Western Europe, and Japan. Because of Millier, the IOC allowed women to rejoin the Olympics movement in the 1920s. Cologne. After a period of joint American-Panamanian control, the Panamanian government took sole control of the canal. In 1999, the canal is now managed and operated by the Panamanian government-owned Panama Canal Authority. That's the Edsel, my friend Don Cundy. The Edsel, big failure. Henry Ford Museum. Henry Ford was an innovative businessman. In 1919, Ford purchased the Dearborn Independent and published it under his own name. It served as a forum for Ford's views, free from other media outlets that had attacked his work and values and were outside his control. The Dearborn Independent covered world events, business and economic news, and fiction from noted authors. It also served as an outlet for Ford's anti-Semitic sentiments. Ford also republished the Protocols of the Elder of Zion, a document that never really existed, but was produced by someone in Russia in the 19th century. There is the babe. In 2023, a 1914 Baltimore News Babe Ruth rookie card sold for $7.2 million, the 3rd highest sum ever paid for a sports card. It narrowly missed the $7.25 million paid for a T206 Sweet Caporal Honus Wagner tobacco card in August 2022. Ruth was the greatest home run hitter of his era and a great pitcher as well. Charles Chaplin was the author, actor, director, and soundtrack composer. More than a century after his film debut, he remains highly regarded for his work in silent films. Thank you so much. Any questions? Any comments? Your turn to talk.
Thank you very much. I've already had my question answered. It's a tricky question, I know. Here in Portugal and Europe, we don't usually talk a lot about the problems that are passing in this time in America. Thank you very much for the enthusiasm and the presentation, and I will keep up seeing what are the news and the next presentations, and thank you.
You
Good
go to
night.
my, you could go to my YouTube channel and see 1910, 1911, 1912.
I will.
Yeah, see that.
Thank you very much.
So,
And the Olympics is a good tie-in to today, because today was the start of the Olympics.
yeah.
Yes. And women were very talked and they were very present today in the Olympics. Very, very keen this subject.
Let me ask you a question. What's the most popular Olympic sport in the Summer Olympics in Portugal?
Here we have Rosa Mota, the runner, long distance runner,
okay.
and running here is very, very important. Rosa Mota, for instance, and Carlos Lopes, the two are two figures very important here in Portugal. So running, and we are not very strong in the Olympics, but swimming also we now have 2 or 3 young stars that are rising, and we are sending more and more people to the Olympics right now. I think it's important for everyone, but it's losing a little bit of the charm of ancient times. I don't know, more commercial right now.
Well, I have an Olympic talk that deals with that 1984, which I had a lot of friends who were part of the Los Angeles Olympic Committee, and that commercialized the Olympics, saved the Olympics.
Yes.
There were only two bidders for the 1984 Olympics in 1977, Tehran and LA, and the Olympic Committee wanted no part of Tehran. No part of them at all.
84
Anybody
Olympics.
else? Anybody else?
I remember the 84 Olympics. Yeah, that's where Mary Lou Retton and the Special K, the serial, what do you call that?
See, your remembrance of the Olympics is totally different from me. Mine is Peter Ueberroth, Harry Usher, Shelley Saltman, Harvey Schiller is still alive, who's still a friend of mine. Rennie Henry, who's still alive, he's up in Seattle, who's a friend of mine. Who else was Rich Levin? I knew all these people. I used to butt heads with Ueberroth, and Harry Usher did all the work there. But that's my take. See, everybody has a different take on the Olympics. Mine is the people I knew and my friends. There.
Well, we have the next one coming up is going to be another great talk in 1974 in sports, politics. Yes. The anniversary of August 9th, I believe, was that the Watergate, one of the
Watergate
break-ins.
Yeah, that's I am tangentially involved with that because when I was covering sports in the 1980s, Larry O'Brien was the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, and he was, of course, the target of the Nixon people. And Nixon arbitrated the 1985 Major League Baseball umpires dispute. And I got to know Nixon after that because I had to deal with him as a reporter. One day he comes up to me and said, and I said to him, "Oh, hello, Mr. President. No, Evan, please call me Dick." So I have some stories about Dick Nixon and Larry O'Brien. That's part of that talk, firsthand experience with them.
So the next one, August 23rd at 6 o'clock, is going to be 1974, 50th anniversary. of the Watergate scandal. Until then, everybody have a great week and be well, and we'll see you on the next talk.
And thank you for inviting me, and thank you all the way from Portugal to watch me tonight and the others. Thank you so much, and I appreciate that. And we'll see you in 4 weeks? Is that
23rd.
wait, let me just check. We have one thing in the chat. Okay, thank you, Peter. 1914, yeah, it's 110 years ago set up. Without 1914 and World War I, we might not have had World War II. But that's another story for another talk.
Have a great evening.
Good night. Bye-bye.